And Kyrot said, no matter the context, whenever the voice is questioned, you tell them, I don't know what you're talking about, and mean it.
And Kyrot said, if it remains true back in the old country that they who define control, then dig this. They who redefine are beyond control.
And Kyrot said, it's not been pretty well determined back in the city that everything is 78% psychological, or at least damn well should be.
And Kyrot said, if you should mistake expanding yourself with blowing yourself up, you might actually get somewhere.
And Kyrot said, those who talk too much talk just enough.
And Kyrot said, in the old world, all of today's games are played by yesterday's rules.
And Kyrot said, in the old world of intelligence, there is no right now.
And Kyrot said, a real explorer has got to put some distance between himself and everywhere else.
And Kyrot said, in the city, all photographs have been retouched.
And Kyrot said, the cruder the force, the more power it must expend to stay in control.
And Kyrot said, when pygmies riot, no one runs for cover. Well...
And Kyrot said, secondary rulers prefer to deal with secondary matters.
And Kyrot said, more people have gone to war than have gone to the library. Which is part of what makes this such an interesting intellectual battleground.
And Kyrot said, the lure of ignorance needn't be bottled.
And Kyrot said, when new forces get into power, that is, change has actually taken place, the first thing they want to do is enact new laws. Don't you ever fall for this trap, or your new shoes results in 2 left feet.
And Kyrot said, those things absolutely, unconditionally irreversible are not actually all that irreversible.
And Kyrot said, one guy used to turn on one of his voices and say, don't go delicate on me now.
And Kyrot said, synonym for new intelligence, topological curiosity.
And Kyrot said, an idea which has been dead for 2 hours or more is dead, or at least should be dead.
And Kyrot said, treat yourself intellectually as you would like to be treated.
Although we've got plenty in backward history to use as examples, I can hardly resist. Here we are circa, whatever the hell it is, August the 2nd, 1989. And those of you watching the news, today was the kind of day that we've got in an international situation. We've got easily that ordinary intelligence will identify as 5, 6 players going on. We've got this one, I just call them countries. There's one player that's got hostages, and this other country steals a hostage from that country. And then this country threatens to kill hostages it's holding of a third country. And then the third country is talking about, and its leaders announcing via the media about what they're considering doing, all the way from making physical attacks on country 1, country A, to going through all kinds of diplomatic and private channels with countries D, E, and F. It all sounds like a kind of very intense, sometimes public, sometimes secret, international affair. But are any of you getting to the point now that behind all this, what you can see is a ballet. That the energy behind it, it is literally a dance going on. But if all your intelligence can go for, if the only thing that it is attracted to and needs to eat is the verbal version of turning this matter temporarily, this energy temporarily into a kind of matter that can be talked about, then you do see men, for instance, on TV, it was the easiest way to describe it, leaders of countries saying, well, we didn't intend to do so-and-so, and the leader of another country says, well, if such and such doesn't happen, we're going to do so-and-so. Then another one, they show him up, and he says, well, I don't want to make any rash statements because international diplomacy still works best with a certain kind of delicate secrecy, but I'll keep you people informed. And it sounds as though this is serious, material, and no more than material affairs going on. It's a dance. It's a flow of energy. It is a kind of, there is no such dance out in the material, visible world. I can easily say a kind of ballet to distinguish it between a two-party dance, like on a ballroom floor. But they're groups of people. Some of you at times, I guess it's not ill-founded for a good simple diagram about all the strange ways in which I try to temporarily verbalize certain things. But if nothing else, picture within the body of life itself a nice big fat juicy vessel, like a blood vessel. And in the body of life itself is going out in certain ways and down one line, third line, another line, and you've got everything from worms to dogs to mountains. And then there's one particular line that is running exclusively on our level into the intellect of man. It is a singular vessel. It is carrying a kind of blood, which on our level, of course, is carrying food and oxygen. It's carrying the energy to keep you alive. But there is what amounts to a specific vessel, a conduit that is feeding on this level, is feeding uniquely man's intellect. There is that kind of three-dimensional drawing. If it helps, again, if you consider, remember this, the whole thing, that you could say down at the lower levels, it's not improper to picture it this way, that those kinds of flows we have in common with worms and dogs, and even what would appear to be rather non-viable elementary parts of our planet, which I was indicating by mountains, but you are made up of the same molecules, the same elements, but beyond anything that you can sensually perceive in this life, beyond that, there is a blood vessel from the body of life that touches only man, and it touches man in one place, not down the lower part of his spine, not in his some kind of heart, not in some kind of soul, not in some kind of vague nebulous spirit that the religions like to talk about. It touches him. It is feeding one area. That's the purpose. This. It is specific. That is its only purpose. In the same way that I know I'm stretching a bit physiologically, but that you could say that the organs of the body, certain ones of them, need specific blood. They need specific combinations of oxygen and blood, and etc. You can look at man as being a kind of systematic, rather than an organ, it's really a systematic function in life's body, but there is a specific blood vessel that runs out, and it feeds this, nothing else, not directly. This. Then you can picture this further. Then you can picture man's intellect. Now let's go to another level from this. Picture man's intellect as being its own kind of singular blood vessel, and it's feeding unique purposes, systems and processes on this planet that now it's as though I were talking about that this was man's intellect on a more primitive level than life's body itself, but it feeds specific purposes, not a thing like man's intellect, but it is serving specific purposes. It is serving to fuel, to furnish the energy to processes that are going on this planet that would not be going on were it not for man's intellect. And of course, behind that, using three-dimensional speech, you say that they would not be going on were it not for the fact that life, first off, is feeding specifically man's intellect, and then man's intellect is doing it. But to keep it down to a level that most people ordinarily on a good warm night prefer, that is, how does this apply to me? So we'll forget about life for a second. It applies to man on the basis that the intellect is not dissimilar whatsoever from that diagram, that it is like one singular, specific conduit, blood vessel, and there is specific energy feeding into life on this planet. Let's just worry about this. Life on this planet, processes, systems, and it's getting its energy, these processes and systems I'm referring to, is getting its energy uniquely from man's intellect. If you took away the intellect of man, if this planet had man still, but with no intellect, many of the processes that you, based on ordinary intelligence, that you might think are important, not important, irrelevant, you never even gave any specific attention to, but there would be processes that would immediately disappear that would absolutely disrupt this planet to such a degree that whatever ideas life had in mind would be thwarted along this particular line. There are things that only exist, and by things I'm not referring to nouns, I remind you. Only primal forces can make a noun. Not God or Joyce Kilmer. Only primary forces can make a noun, and then they forget about it. It is man's intellect that is singularly responsible for processes, for systems, for verbalizations, in both senses of verbalizations, on this planet. Many, many of which you never give any consideration to. You're not supposed to. You would never analyze as being either of necessity or whether they are simply alternative means to reach some other end. But there are systems that are fed only through man's intellect. That is the way life is getting the energy. That is the way life is getting the foodstuffs, the oxygens, to carry that parallel on to these particular processes, is through man's intellect, not through dogs, not through worms, not through mountains, not even through the lower processes of the human nervous system. Only through this. It is a singular blood vessel. There's another job description that I can give the man here. That is, his job is to make the visible, the invisible, visible. To make ideas manifest. To make the plans of life come to material conclusions. Now, all kinds of people who needed work, like philosophers and writers throughout the ages, priests, ministers, perhaps your uncle, continue to believe that they wrestle with this question, or should be wrestling with the question of what's the purpose of man, what are we here for? And 3 or 4 times a year, whether you notice it or not, you get a better response than all the religions and all the systems have ever come up with. I just gave you another one. All right, life did. It just didn't intend to. And it is not simplistic. It is not obvious to the point of being overbearing. Unless your brain has got a weak bearing, it's about to go out anyway. Because some of you, I do hear a kind of scraping noise when I see you. When some of you really do like this, I hear noises I consider somewhat dangerous. I don't know whether Perhaps you shouldn't drive so fast until you see to it. It is to make that which is invisible visible. And again, if it seems too simplistic, let me back up and say that that is a job description, or that is a systematic description I can give to life doing this through man, is to make that which is invisible visible. To make dreams, plans, materially manifest. That is a very good, at least for tonight, job description of what man is doing. It is a very good job description of what man's intellect specifically is doing. It is a very good job description of what life is doing specifically through man's intellect. If you can run sideways for just a second, it's kind of man's intellect taking secondary level ideas and making them into a kind of, sort of, sub-primary appearing level of necessity. Was that conditional enough? I did it for a reason before I tried to get more specific, because as some of you should realize by now, it is not quite as clear-cut a matter as calling something secondary and primary, for the reasons I've gone into more than one time. But it's almost as though, if you can look at it this way, try it like this. If you need another definition, you need another way to try and operationally see it yourself, the difference between, in fact, in action, between the reality behind what I call secondary and primary for the time being, would be to ask yourself about any particular activity. Ask yourself, which is tricky, but ask yourself, if it were not for man's intellect, would this thing exist? That is a cutting edge to the reality behind the division, at least on the 3D level. So, taking that, can you hear the necessity of the inquiry, or my statement in asking whether you can see that in a certain way humans are taking secondary dreams and turning them into what would appear to be, from a certain way, sub-primary necessities. That is, before the human intellect, or down below it, worms, dogs, mountains, have less needs of a certain kind than humans do. Withal, humans need certain things apparently that dogs don't. Not just television, not just art supports, but apparently need whole systems, whole codified ways of behavior and interaction that no other creature needs. And they would not need them, if you can begin to see it. They would not exist, forget need in that sentence, they would not exist were it not for man's intellect. If man's nervous system went no higher than a dog or a chimpanzee, then these specific things I am referring to, in general, not yet by name, would not exist. But once they do exist, then they're sort of, kind of, like a sub-primary level. That is, before the human intellect, who needed religion? Nobody. But now that it's here, only those of very primitive intelligence shake their fist and holler about all the ills and woes that religion has caused. Such people are just critics on a real cheap paper that life puts out every day. Because now it is necessary. But do you see, were it not for man's intellect, you got to play the kind of parallel, coeval game of reality, that if we had humans as they are and yet not like they are, that if we were still human and we didn't have the intellect, that we were not being specifically fed by that blood vessel in life, that conduit of energy, we would not have religion. But we do have religion because we're being fed like that. Or we're being fed like that because we have religion. But if you can see simultaneously that if we were talking about humans and they were just like they are, except they're not like they are, in other words, they don't have an intellect anymore, then you wouldn't need religion. Not right or wrong, you just simply wouldn't be there. But now it is there, it's like a sub-level of primary necessity. Do you follow? In other words, it's not necessary until it becomes necessary, and then it's too late. Does that help? Because all of this is invalid once you get into a more complex world. This is only true in a lineal society, which I don't know why you people don't move, but it's that there are things that are not necessary until they're necessary. And once they're necessary, once they're in place, it's too late. Then you can say, ah, come on, those weren't necessary. And if you were talking to a voice from another more complex dimension, the voice would say, you're right. But then if you tried to go further, like, well, I'm going to go tell somebody that we shouldn't have done that, then the voice would have to say, I had some hope for you there for a second. Because it is necessary now. It's back to what I was referring to several tapings ago. It's almost a secondary form of creation. That is, it's almost as though man is playing some active part in that Michelangeolian twist I did of the painting, remember, of the guides and then Adam, and they're touching fingers. It's like that. It's not just this passive dork sitting there of Adam going, you know, send me the juice and, you know, fire me up and I'll be. It's now like, once man's got the intellect, and once this system is in operation, once this schematic is in operation, and it's much more complex than that. I'm not trying to be cute, it just goes into another dimension. We're only seeing part of it here. But ordinary people do not even see this part. But once this is in operation, then it's as though Adam, sometime, some apparently linear time after the gods go zap, and he goes, all right, now I'm awake, I'm going. And it's as though sometime after that, it's as though he sort of plays along, that he's not just a passive lump of clay. That it's as though every now and then, remember I'm saying as though because there's no way to describe this really, but it's as though every now and then that the major forces, the primary forces are saying, well, I think I'm going to do so-and-so. And it's almost as though that he says, hey, have you ever considered kind of putting this little spin on it or do it like this? And it's as though, sort of, that life can go, huh, all right, let's give it a try. That is what I am referring to right now as secondary creation. This secondary creation only comes about in the 3D world, to ordinary perception, when the impetus of it, that is, when the thing was at one time invisible, and now there is some visible manifestation. Because as opposed to what I'm referring to ad hocly as secondary creation, primary creation does not go from the invisible to the visible. Primary creation is what life has already done. Primary creation is already there. You can mine out elements and turn them out of Rapid City into zippers, or out of Detroit City into internal combustion engines, but it did not go from the invisible to the visible. Religion went from the invisible to the visible. Philosophy, economics. Do you get the drift? No? I was afraid it was too simple. It's not new on the secondary level unless at one time it was invisible. Or if you can carry it a little further, it is not true secondary creation. It is not a true manifestation of work of man's intellect turning some of life's dreams into material conclusions unless at one time, I'm going to put it to you another way, at least at one time whatever this thing is didn't exist. Now see, an internal combustion engine, you can say the first one that ever rolled off an assembly line or out of somebody's garage, out of Daimler or Mercedes or whoever it was, you can say, all right, that was the first one. At one time, there was no such thing as an internal combustion engine, and that guy did it. No. The engine itself was never invisible. Everything in that engine at one time was just laying around. People kicked it, they picked it up and threw it at telephone poles, if they'd had telephone poles back then. People spit on it. It was there. What did? A Daimler or a Ford, I'll just throw him in, although he didn't do it. What he did was take the invisible, because there was no such thing as an internal combustion engine. At one time, nobody had ever thought about it. And so at one time, this thing did not exist. But do you follow? It did exist, the engine itself, because all the elements were there. Everybody knew that. It didn't take the discovery of some element that nobody knew about. But at one time, the idea, the plan, the dream, the thinking of it did not exist. That is the part that life has man playing. That is what I was trying to hint to you as a new job description of what man is up to. Primary creation does not require any thought that would be perceivable by man. If life is making any change at a level within its own system, if life decides, for whatever reason, that there is a fish somewhere in an area that's becoming, as they call it, polluted, it's getting less oxygen in this lake. This specific kind of fish that may be fairly rare or perhaps unique, and life decides he needs to keep it. Life will make the fish begin to adapt to the environment of living with less oxygen. But it does not require that the fish think about it. Life does it. That's no longer really even in the level of primary creation, but it would apparently be life making adjustments. But that is not what man's purpose is. Although man is not immune from that. Man has physiologically changed. And as opposed to, I am not trying to give you a prediction, but just to give you a shorthand view, some of you should know, if indeed life still needs Los Angeles, and if indeed life lets the weather stay the way it is right now, the whole idea of smog, let's say that smog, since everything popular starts in Southern California, spreads, and more cities want smog. It becomes the end thing. Men, rather than trying to deal with smog and do something about it, men will simply learn, like these particular fish do, live with less oxygen. Men will begin to live with smog. It's all right. But it will not require that men think about it. They may talk about it once it happens, but it does not require, if life indeed were to do something, as silly as that sounds, which that's your opinion that sounds silly, but I wasn't where I was going with it. It does not require men think about it. Life does that without the entities, without the systems involved having to think, since they can't think anyway, in the level of man, vis-a-vis fish I'm referring to. But when life is going to make these further adjustments, when life is expanding itself in a way that is singular on our planet, it does not do it through fish, does not do it on those particular lines even through geological upheavals, through the production of new land, through the sinking of existing land, through the change in the carbon food chain. It does such things, but it does not require, although men observe it, they talk about it, they whine about it, they wring their hands that we're going to kill ourselves, we're destroying the planet, and we're going to, within a decade, I just heard a new version of it. Guys got it down finally. We are, my friends, he said. And he was a man they flashed on the screen. It was on TV, where I get all my information. The man had a string of degrees worse than malaria fever. Doctor, doctor, doctor. And he says, we are, my friends, in danger within 2 decades of undoing what it took life 40 million years of evolution to do. Which I won't even poke my finger at that anymore, but he said that. So life does have men doing that. Life has plenty of men playing Cassandra, but it is not necessary that the changes get made below the intellectual level. Men do not go, wait a minute, it's gone too far, there's nothing we can do, we cannot reverse the process, not through some easily done or profitable means to begin to change the ways in which we're polluting the atmosphere. So what we've got to do is we've got to figure out how to live with the smog. We've got to learn how to live with more ozone. They don't have to do that. If that's what's going to happen, that will happen. Life sees to that even with man. This is what is singular. Now some of you may, I'll say again, believe that this is pretty obvious by now, or that I must have said it a million times in other ways. But notice you don't remember it. You still will sit around and wring your hands, or you'll still sit there on TV or radio or to your own dialogue and hear somebody whine, complain. Chicken Little will run through your own dialogue using your name, dressed up like you, and you tremble that yes, yes, yes. And it's not yes, yes, yes. Man is serving and being served uniquely and specifically. And it's here. That which you are, either mechanically or through some attempted willful act, it is only there that you can play a part in a kind of real kind of creativity, that you can almost kind of do something. The rest of it will get done. You can trust me on this. If indeed man was about to destroy this planet, if life really has got problems, if life itself, let's say just life on this planet, if life is having problems, trust me, it's going to see to them. You can just trust me. I don't normally say it, but you can just take my damn word for it. Whether life ever invites you or all of us to in some way cooperate or even just stand there and go, my, it may never mention it. But if life is having a problem here, if life is really catching a bad virus from man, if life is really getting psychologically depressed from being around man, if life's beginning to choke on the effluvium that man are putting out, trust me, life is going to take care of itself. There's just no doubt. So you don't have to worry about that unless that's just your inescapable habit. If that's your hobby and you just can't get rid of it. But life does not need you to worry along. Speaking of, I guess we can officially consider this an aside. Secondary and primary activities, if they indeed did exist in the way in which I am artificially, arbitrarily, but for a damn good reason for the moment, labeling, trying to act as an intellectual cartographer for you to see that I am pointing towards something that is functionally real. Not the words. But within that, if there were, for the sake of our make-believe tonight, if there were true, distinct, separate operations of primary interest and activities and then secondary, then you would have to face up to this. They would each one have their own singular opposition. Plus, that third thing that I know nobody likes to think about, and we won't go into that tonight, but the great E pool, the irrelevant forces staying around. But they would each have their own singular opposition. Primary activities, the primary movements of life itself, would have their own opposition. And then, if what I'm referring to as the activities, the kinds of purposes of man's intellect here, if we're going to regard them temporarily as being in some way separate, being singular to the existence of man's intellect, then those activities, those kinds of forces, would have their own opposition. Okay? All right? Okay. Now, the aside I wanted to point out was, this opposition, although it's not labeled as such, since even the original premise is not even noticed in life, there is a thing about the opposition. If there were primary and secondary forces, and each one had its own opposition, it is only with the latter that human intelligence finds fault. Would you like me to explain? Well, I would hope so. In areas that would be primary activities, such as, now of course we're talking about down within the body of life itself, there being no down, but down within the body of life itself, here at least on planet Earth, below the human brain. In here, the dynamics at work, primary activities, like the good old food chain of eat or be at, right, down the animal level. No middle class, ordinary human intellect finds any fault with that. I mean, you'd be an idiot too. You just can't. It's just ridiculous. But now I get into secondary activities. Men doing combat over religion, politics, philosophies. Then the human intellect finds that, how strong a word should we use? Reprehensible. Almost unbelievable. And they see no connection. They see no parallel. Not just on the basis I'm describing everything's got to have its own opposition. If it's alive, if it is visible, if it is perceivable, if you think about it, it's got its own opposition. And so if there are such divisions as I am hinting with these verbal maps of primary and secondary activities, the primary activities of all the way from the food chain. I was trying to make one that can be as bloody and gory. It doesn't mean that you would sit around and enjoy watching animals kill each other, or to see films of the hunter bringing down what it has to feed on. But people do not in some way have a moral sense of outrage. There is no judgmental feeling about, well, that terrible, terrible lion. You may not want to see the film. That's not the point, to see a lion attack a deer. But nobody has any sense of there being some kind of abomination about the affair. That is the opposition necessary. If there are those who eat, there have to be those who get eaten. There have to be those that attempt not to be eaten so that they can stay alive and eat somebody else. But when it gets to what I'm calling tonight again, the area of secondary activities, the kinds of things that would not be in existence were it not for the human intellect. Those kinds of things that men are in conflict about, all the way from verbal conflict to actual armed warfare. Look how the human intellect, that is, look how life has made the human intellect just almost quiver in their little jelly brains over the outrage. They even become morally, righteously indignant, sarcastic, express absolute disbelief that humans, intellectual humans, will get into wars over something as silly as one king insulted another one. Or that one group says, our God parts his hair in the middle and speaks Yiddish. And this other group says, we have taken insults from you people, but we all know that God is a Bulgarian and leans more toward the Greek Orthodox. And they kill each other. And those outside the particular conflict at that time, outside that particular dance, and looking at backward history, they look it over and they just say it's more than an anomaly, it's just despicable. What gives? Why is it at the very level that I'm referring to as the primary level that must be in operation for us to stay alive, for all of humanity to exist, for humanity to exist enough for the nervous system, individually and collectively as a race, that we have gotten to the point that this can operate and begin to serve this singular function? Before you get there, primary needs must be met. You have got to eat. Humanity has got to eat. It's got to stay relatively sheltered enough to live, to reproduce. It's got to do that. And to do that, we kill things. We kill animals. We kill plants. We tear up, as ordinary intelligence would tell you, the environment to make ourselves comfortable. Nobody finds any fault with that. Not in general. You just can't. There's no way you can find fault in it. To eat, even if you're a vegetarian, you're killing stuff. You're consuming something. You know, celery was minding its own business. Those potatoes wished you no harm. Those potatoes are not going to attack you unless they do a remake of the Killer Tomatoes and do it with potatoes. So what is life up to that this goes on and there is no sense of any sort of outrage? There's not even a question about it. And then when it gets into areas that are uniquely human, it gets into my secondary areas, then the opposition, it's still a food chain, it's an energy chain, but it's in the world that seems to be invisible. That is the origin, the initial basis of religion, politics, economics, everything that men fight over other than food, territory, shelter, sex. Other than that, all these other areas are continually, it changes from time to time and from the source, from the certain groups, but all of the conflicts in these areas are continually and historically attacked, and not just sort of, well, some of us don't approve of that. The reaction is a sense of holy outrage. Why does life do that? Why does it give man's intellect the thought that in its unique domain, the things necessary to make it grow and to stay healthy, that is opposition, a food chain, that within this food chain of there being the eaten and the eators, the prey, the hunter, the dominant, the submissive, that it takes two to dance, and of course the place to dance, the good old Tango Palace. But then it makes men find it to be despicable and to claim that something should be done. Of course they can't figure out why, and of course why they can't figure out why is there's nothing can be done. But why does life make men do it? That is again having men out on a kind of fool's quest. Why? Well, after we turn the tape over, perhaps we will find out why. Visible into something real. And it's those same activities that then apparently produce what? World problems. Whereas if it were not at this level, and we were all somewhere below that level, we would only have one problem, primarily. How to keep from starving. That what I want is freedom. If I could just live a few more years and not every day have to worry about starving. But now, we're beyond that. You people don't worry about starving. If you want a freedom, if you want a wish granted for some freedom, it would be freedom from what? Freedom from worrying all the time. Freedom from being upset. Not upset down in your stomach. That is on the base of your stomach hollering, I'm starving. Upset here. But what's making you upset? Itself. It is self-inducing if it were as it appears. If humanity could see in a little more complex way the way things are overlapping, it is self-induced illness. But it's inescapable. I don't mean self-induced illness in a way that psychiatry refers to it, that, well, you kind of help bring this on yourself. because you're operating in self-destructive behavior patterns and all that chit-chat. No. It's inescapable. That is, the thing that makes me unique makes me uniquely suffer. The thing that makes me be able to almost be creative makes me then look at what's going on and went, holy Jesus, I've created Frankenstein. That is, our creations, our air conditioning, our technology, the very things that makes us modern, non-starving, is making me and us fear that we're about to kill ourselves. You wouldn't like to be able to give a design award for that if you could see it just a little bit more. If you could just take sometimes my theatrical stick enthusiasm and trying to get you to see it and all these, well, these few hand gestures, and me to go through all this. I know the Grammys and the Oscars, but I'm sure there's some kind of society that gives out design awards, industrial design awards. God, what they're missing. And one voice, or in this one part of the universe, said, well, I can see what the problem is right now. And another voice says, well, what is it? And he says, well, it's being able to see problems. All right. I thought maybe that might help some of you. Those of you it didn't help, I can play more or less the same tune, and I'll just play it in a different key, or at least go from a minor to a major, and say, one voice out in the universe says, well, I see the basis of all those so-called human problems. And this other voice says, well, what is it? And he says, it's being able to say such things as human problems. And of course the other voice, if it was actually coming from our part of the universe, from our planet, would go, you're nuts. You need help. And then the first voice would have went, yeah, you're right. I was nuts to point that out. It was not, of course, a sermon, and there's no way to convince you because there's nothing to be convinced of, but there literally are no such things as world problems. Now, it would be a different thing, I'll say one more time, if we, those of you that are exposed to this and the place where this is operating, if we were still primarily engaged in primary activities, then we would have primary problems such as starvation. And there are people going hungry on this planet by reports that I take as serious as anybody else, and any of you who want to help, you should. If you could feed somebody starving, how would you think that you should not help? But you people are not operating at that level. That is not the level. Beyond that, there are no such things as world problems. Now don't worry just about world problems like out here in your world. Your world problem is, I don't want to worry. God, if I could just quit worrying. But what do you worry over? And it's not your fault. Your parents didn't cause it. It's not your unconscious traumas from childhood. I'll tell you where it comes from. It's right there. It's mixed in with your food, your oxygen. It's in the blood that flows through you. Not just the literal blood, the dialogue. Just because I painted that red and kept saying blood, you knew I didn't mean just the blood coursing through your veins. Because just that will feed all the lower parts. To get up here, though, it gets refined. Has everybody already forgot MV12? The dialogue is feeding this. It's a different combination of food and oxygen and MV12. The dialogue is feeding this. And if people ask for freedom, what they're asking for, people beyond the primary level, they're asking for freedom from this thing upsetting me. It's not that I have an upset digestive system from lack of food. This thing gives me indigestion. And it's not you individually. It's everybody. Because as long as there's a premise, indigestion is just a moment away. You just don't understand it. If there's a racetrack, the starting line says premise. And by the time your front wheels get over that line, forget about getting to the first turn, forget about halfway through the race. As soon as your front wheels go over the start line, indigestion sets in. What I started to say, the continual blindness to the topology of this situation, of there being no such thing as world problems, even when there apparently are, it's still a matter that they're individual. There just simply are no world problems. It cannot be dissected, especially trisected. It cannot be analyzed by any process even remotely resembling human intelligence, and be seen to be a world problem, anything beyond the primary level. And so as long as you stay blind to this, your life is involved with you, I hate to say it, but most of you got the blues enough to where a little more is not going to hurt. The rest of your life, you and everybody else, all you're going to be done with from a certain view is you're going to just stay involved with busy work and running off on fool's errands. But according to your peers, that is, according to that ordinary flow, even feeding the general level of human intelligence, apparently you may be involved with quite serious, admirable activities such as trying to save the environment. The environment don't need saving. It ain't going nowhere. It ain't going out of business. They're not going to close it up. The government will not have to take over the environment and do the good jobs that they have done with the savings and loan and Penn Central. The environment is not going the way of Amtrak. Or if it does, I'm with you. I'm going to get on the first train leaving. And not an Amtrak train either. But you will continue, as you're supposed to, with ordinary people, of course, to say busy work and fool's errands is not criticism of life, and it is not a proper commentary on ordinary activity, because it is serious. The people struggling with the problems of the ozone, the people struggling with the problems of men's psychological bruises, that's all serious business. It's real cute. But if that's all that you can see, you'll never know better. But if you begin to see that there is a continual dance going on, that what seems to be ordinary human affairs are simply temporary arrangements so that energy appears to be matter, and it can be named and talked about, then you're going to continue to start getting little glimpses that everything you do outside of this kind of activity, everything that you do, no matter how ephemeral it seems to be serious at the moment, you begin to get glimpses that it's just cute. It's just busy work. If I wasn't doing this, I'd be doing something else. Not just manually. If I wasn't sitting around worrying about, the poor conflict over there between those two religious groups. If I wasn't worried about that, I'd be going, I wonder how much bigger that hole is down around the Antarctica. It's just busy work. It's just like life continually going, it sees too many people without anything particular to do, and it's like he'll suddenly play that good old Alabama waitress game in a bar, whether any of you ever get it or not. It's like life will suddenly take one group and sort of kick it and say, hey, won't you and them fight? And suddenly this group, like the Presbyterians always got along with everybody, and it's like the Presbyterians somewhere turn around, say, we never have liked the way you Episcopalians look down your nose at us. You don't fight? It's busy work. And it can apparently be of world-shaking significance to the participants, as it's supposed to be. There's how people are running off, trying to carry messages here and there, trying to proclaim that the sky indeed is falling. It's fool's errands. You run and you come back, and you're still in line. Nothing has happened. You know it all. I don't even like to hear myself have to use examples to where there's any danger that somebody at some other time and place would hear this tape and went, boy, that's serious. I like what he says because not many people understand the gravity of the situation. You know, every now and then I get some comment like that. Somebody will write me that saw a tape or read something the public had got spread around, and they will congratulate the damn few people. They'll pick out something that I can't remember I said or I knew I didn't say, but they'll point out not many people realize the severity, the threat in this one area, but boy, I like the way you jumped right on it. Of course, thank God most of those people do not have a return address included. Think about it, I don't know. I'm going to stop the public meeting for you people who are part of public meetings. So fill in the rest of this tape, as always, with your own thoughts. We have 15 minutes left on this tape, and I'll be cutting out my part and go to it. Back in business. It was a little excursion for whoever is seeing the tape. Just look around at life, which you can do, of course, up here. And just look at the common systems, operations going on in life, and I already pulled out a handful of them. And try and ask yourself if there was, and I'm assuming by giving you the excursion that those of you who attempt this do get some glimpse of what I am intending to point out, the shadows of reality notwithstanding, but what's behind the terms of primary and secondary activities, to try and use that kind of temporary map, that kind of template up here, and look at just the common things that modern civilized man is a part of, that seems to even be his own institutions, inventions, and how many of them would you think are of some primary significance? Or are they all secondary? Religion, politics, economic theories, fashion, restaurants, the stock market. Everything I mentioned is in some way, you understand now, a kind of at least sub-primary necessity. That is, if you whipped in those, if you suddenly yanked any of those out of the fabric of ordinary life, it would do real detriment. It could be deadly. But on the basis of the kind of mapping and sketching I've been doing, that I'll assume that you can now participate in inside the privacy of your own brain, you could get something from it. You just start looking around and considering, is this kind of activity as serious and as important, as inescapable as it seems to be? Is it actually of some primary necessity? And don't just immediately say and parrot what I've already said, that, well, if it's not having to do with eating or fucking or getting out of the rain, it's not. Be a little more subtle than that. Jesus. Plus, you people shouldn't say things like fucking. You should say making love. That's one more syllable, though, than fucking. You're just wasting your energy. Anyway, don't do that. If you're going to trust me and me say that there's a possibility that you could personally get something, just kind of look around. It's not you're trying to make an absolute decision and to look around and go, well, let's see, advertising. You see a billboard, advertising. Secondary. No. Remember the guy that Kyrute pointed out tonight earlier? The guy that said that sometimes he'd turn on himself and say, hey, don't go delicate on me now. All right. Then you can also at times turn on yourself and say, hey, don't go crude on me. There are times a certain amount of gentility of the intellect could be that you look at advertising. That'd be a decent one. You're driving home after tonight's meeting and you look up at billboards and you realize they're everywhere. And of course you could immediately say, well, they're not, they're secondary. But think about it. I hate to do this for you, but I'm telling you that there's something else down in the cracks, down in the corners. There's always. You can start thinking, well, what is it they're exactly advertising? Does advertising, if it is secondary, does advertising then advertise secondary stuff? Or is all advertising somewhere a secondary activity based on a primary? Does anybody advertise something that is not actually somewhere based upon an essential? That kind of thing. To where it's not just, well, if it's advertising, it's got to be secondary. Maybe. But then continue to drive along and consider, well, wait a minute. I'm not going any further. If your brain can't begin to do some of this by now, then notwithstanding the fact that I was pointing out a few tapings ago that, hey, this is more than entertainment, if your brain can't go any further than that, I guess I could be wrong with some of you. Maybe it is just entertainment, which is all right. Yeah, it's all right. Bye.